Good evening and welcome to the presentation of our new initiative on artificial intelligence and how it will affect the future of management. I'm here today speaking from our Barcelona campus with three of the colleagues on the faculty, Samsa Samila, Mireia Gene, Sebastian Brion, who were sitting here right next to me to officially kick off an initiative that we first announced in February. Pre-COVID, we were already planning in March to make a presentation, which we're finally able to do today in this new format, which we've been using quite successfully, I think, with our alumni to stream directly live sessions on relevant topics for alumni and managers in general. Artificial intelligence as a field in science and technology has been around for many decades. I remember in the late 90s studying myself at MIT, encountering enthusiastic engineers and scientists who were developing already some applications, many of them at the time related to robotics. And since then, the field has done many ups and also some downs. Expectations were not immediately met. But at this point, I think we have all noticed in the past few years, we have reached a new level where technology, and specifically artificial intelligence, has produced already some very promising solutions to many of the issues that we as humans are facing. We see that, for example, autonomous driving is in a late stage, I'd say, development already. Many applications that have to do with images, image detection services, etc. And some of the more visual examples that have to do, for example, with being very successful players in chess or in Go, which we've seen, have driven home the message that there is a new era in AI that has come and that will have an impact on many parts of our lives. We can already tell that it will affect how we live, how we work, and we know there is also a question around which jobs will exist in the future. And we can also tell that because it's affecting the way we work, we do things, it will impact organizations, what organizations do, and specifically how they do things. And that's where the field also of management enters. That's where also as a business school, we have a specific interest in contributing to explore jointly how technology and specifically AI will affect management and therefore the future of organizations. This initiative has, I would say, three main goals. The first one, to contribute through research, and we'll hear about this in a second from our colleagues, through research and also specific courses for managers to advance the field and knowledge and practice of how management is being done, should be done in this new context of artificial intelligence. There are publications that we've already done. We're already offering a few courses. There are promising results already, some cooperations with other institutions already happening, and we'll hear more about this in a second. The second goal is to precisely provide a platform. That's why we're using this mechanism of an initiative, which is not a single faculty member or a single chair, but a set of faculty members that work together and provide a platform of collaboration also for other people and organizations, be they researchers, be they practitioners in management, or for example, CEOs that want to come together and discuss and understand more deeply how artificial intelligence will affect the way their organizations are being run and should be run. Actually, a little over a year ago, we had a first encounter, multidisciplinary encounter, where we gathered both researchers and also CEOs from different organizations. In fact, one of the fruits of this encounter was the book we published a few months ago, Jody Carnels and myself, with contributions from several authors on the effect of AI on management. And the third goal, broad goal, is precisely to help shape the future in the humanistic society, to be a more humanistic society in the context of AI, to make sure that we together reap the benefits of technology. After all, we'll be all using AI-based tools because they will help us do things better, more effectively, more efficiently, and at the same time make sure that it really helps all, that nobody in society is left behind as we use these technologies. And that requires a context where different people come together and discuss the benefits, the potential benefits, but also drawbacks of technologies. When a person develops a new technology, he or she obviously has an interest that is driven by the usage of this technology, but there also needs to be the other side of the discussion that gives a balanced view on advantages and disadvantages of the use of a new technology in society. And that's where precisely multidisciplinary work is very important, as it can be provided by the researchers, the faculty members at our institutions that are and will be working in this field, and the collaboration that we want to start precisely with colleagues from other institutions, from companies and their leadership. So it's my pleasure to open with this little introduction, this event here today of launching officially this initiative. I hope that you as the alumni and friends of IESE and other interested audience that is watching this today will see this as an invitation to cooperate with us, to reach out, to collaborate. It would be wonderful if all together we would make this a great success and make a contribution that is relevant to the world, to society, to make sure that organizations through AI, the way they use AI, will be managed better, and that will have a great impact, a positive impact on society at large. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Professor Samsa Samila, who is leading this initiative.
Thank you, Franz. So let's get started. About 2 weeks ago, The Guardian, a big British newspaper, ran an opinion piece that started out with these words: "I am not a human, I am a robot, a thinking robot. I know that my brain is not a feeling brain, but it is capable of making rational, logical decisions. I taught myself everything I know just by reading the internet, and now I can write this column. My brain is boiling with ideas." This article was in fact written in the algorithm specifically is GPT-3 by a company called OpenAI, and it's amazing. It's in terms of being able to produce a coherent piece of writing about a specific topic. And in this case, the Guardian editor said that the work required to edit it, to put it together, was less than for many human writers. So no wonder the managers are worried. This is from a year ago survey by Accenture, where 75% of executives believe that they risk going out of business if they cannot scale AI. 75%. A lot of executives are very worried about it. This is a serious issue that affects the life and business around us. So that's why this initiative, that's the reasoning behind launching this, is that we need to be working on this topic to help managers, to help individuals across the economy, across organizations, specifically as a business school, those executives who are doing new startups, doing new businesses, doing existing businesses, and working across the range of managerial positions. So we see AI now, anecdotally, we see evidence of it all across in the economy. We see translation, we see Amazon Go shopping, we see robots and so on. But as a first step, in this initiative, we really want to have a good picture of the overall economy, like about the overall macro picture of what actually is happening. And our colleague Mireia Ginet is going to tell us about that.
Thank you, Samsa. Yes, indeed. So we are very well aware of all these AI investments around the world, this race for AI. And of course, as our dean was saying, the looming question behind is how will AI shape our work, the nature and the future of our work. And of course, we want to move beyond the anecdotes. We want to take a macro view. And however, this macro view, it's pitch black. And the reason why it's hard for us to know how much AI is being adopted by firms is because going into the production function of a corporation is not transparent, right? This is non-trivial. It's very hard to do so. So what we are trying to do is answer this very simple question: how much AI is being adopted by corporations? There are different ways that we can actually capture and measure AI, different routes. So for example, we could estimate how many AI startups are around the world: China, US, Europe, right? There's a lot of discussion, a lot of articles covering that. Another way is to look at the private equity investments, right? We know that private equity always has they are very sensitive to new opportunities. Or think about AI-related acquisitions. But all of these gives us a very partial view. And what we did in our research is to try to come up with a more encompassing view, more fundamental. And what is this about? Well, this is going back to the nature of work, trying to find for each type of job how much AI is penetrating, right? Jobs across the broad spectrum, from agriculture to manufacturing to high tech, how much AI is penetrating all these jobs. And what we did was to use big data here, a large database that covers 190 million online job postings in the US for a decade, so from 2010 to 2019. And each job has details about the skills. So what we do is take an AI skill-based view. We're going to identify skills, 75 AI skills that are related to the AI, and then see how much of those are requested through time across industries and occupations. And of course, out of these 75 skills, as you can imagine, the most popular are the general terms, machine learning, or in general, artificial intelligence. But if you look at the bottom of this list, right, there's more specifics such as Keras or IBM Watson, right? So we can capture all of these different skills for each job. And what we can immediately learn is to see how much is the hiring growing in the US over the last decade. You can see here it's plotted in terms of the percentage of AI postings versus overall postings. And what we learn here is that the growth has grown by a factor of 4, right? Well, let's compare this growth in AI relative to other specialized software skills. And what you observe here is that what we observe over the last 10 years is that this is a flat line, right? It doesn't compare to the growth in AI. Now, our next question is, well, how is AI diffusing across sectors and occupation? How much there is a penetration of AI? And what we see in this graph here is the distribution of AI across different industries. At the top, we're going to have information systems and professional services. But what's most interesting to us, can you observe from 2016 onwards, this upcoming trend, the yellow line, for example, or the green and the black line, agriculture and manufacturing, they're trending together. So yes, agriculture, administration services, all of these different sectors are hiring AI. And if they hire AI, this is because they are adopting it. More precisely, what type of occupations are incorporating AI? And of course, we're going to see at the top occupations that are related to mathematics and to computation. Those occupations will go across industries. However, at the bottom, we see as well a trend, an interesting trend, upward trend on legal and management. And we are going to be exploring more about the relevance of these other occupations. Okay, so far, big diffusion across sectors and industries. When we ask ourselves, well, what about which companies hire more AI? And here we have the full universe of corporations in the US, publicly traded. And we see that there are 3 main characteristics. Those that are very large by market cap hire a lot of AI relative to the smaller ones. Those that are R&D intensive, and notice the gap between the top and the bottom. Yeah, this will have to mind the gap. And third, those that are cash intensive as well, cash rich. So large corporations, R&D intensive, and rich in cash, those are taking the lead and investing more and more in AI. And our next question that we've been able to answer is, does it pay to have AI skills, right? This is very much a question that our MBAs and executive MBAs ask us. Does it pay to have AI skills? Well, yes, with 100 million online postings, we can answer that question. And the answer is yes, it does. And to our surprise, you can observe that management is the occupation that gains the highest premium, 10%. And note that this 10% is for occupations within the same company. So these, we are comparing the same two management occupations within a company as close as possible. The only difference is that one requires AI. And if that is the case, it will pay 10% more, indicating that those managers are more productive. Interestingly so, companies hiring more people in AI as well pay higher non-AI occupations, right? These are more productive corporations. So this leads us, this evidence led us to our final question, right? Well, is there something, this tension between should we bet AI on managers or in building large IT teams, right? This important question. So this is at the heart of what is the impact of AI on firm policies. So here now we have already built a firm level AI adoption measure, right? We know how much AI each corporation is adopting through time. And what we want to observe is, well, what is the impact on market capitalization, on size? Are they growing more? Are they investing more in CapEx? And are they investing more in R&D? And what we observe is that indeed that is the case. Those corporations that adopted AI earlier in our time series at the beginning of 2010, 2011, 12, they grew faster. Yes. And what's most interesting to us, and it was really surprising, is that this positive relationship is driven mostly by the adoption of AI in management positions, not in IT positions, but in management positions. So what is the insight here from all this research? This is what I've been sharing with you. This is research in collaboration across different departments, the econ department, the strategy department, and the finance department. And what the insight that we gained from this research is that managers with AI skills are key to unlock the potential of AI, the potential for growth, right? It might require rethinking strategies, rethinking operations, and as well how we build teams. And with that, I pass on again the mic to Samsa.
Thank you. So this leads to a very natural next question then. Is AI then a general purpose technology? And what we mean by that is general purpose technologies are these basic core technologies that fundamentally underlie our economic development. We can talk about steam engines, we can talk about electricity, we can talk about computers, and now increasingly machine learning. The evidence from our project so far is pretty clear on this, is that AI is widely used in the economy. It's developing very rapidly. It's a source of new innovations. And it's really diffused across occupations, industries, and sectors, and so on. And so what this is suggesting is that AI could be at the same level of importance for our economy in the future as steam and electricity were back in the day. And what this implies then is that the changes are going to be radical and they're going to take time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. But if you think about when we went from steam power to electricity, for instance, in factories, steam engines by physics are large and you have these pulleys running around the factory transferring power. Electric engines, on the other hand, are small and you can transfer electric power through wires very easily. And so the initial approach was simply to put electricity where steam used to be. But the real gains came only a decade or two later when we fundamentally redesigned the entire factory with the new power. And what we think is going to happen is the same thing with AI. We're first going to see exactly what the evidence suggests is AI diffusing across all sectors and occupations. And then what we're going to start seeing is fundamental redesign of how companies operate, new kinds of business models and new structures, new operations, new organizations, and so on. So if you represent a company in any way, you can look at the value chain, you can look at the business model canvas, you're going to see every box with some examples of AI. You're going to see everywhere AI. And now I'm going to pass it to Sebastian, who's going to help and take a deep dive in one of these boxes and explain what's happening there.
Thank you, Samsa. So as Samsa has already indicated, I'll talk a little bit about what's happening with respect to AI and human resources management. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that AI is impacting the full spectrum of the employee lifecycle. And so when we speak of the employee lifecycle, we mean any touch point that you would traditionally associate with HR in any kind of organization, everything from talent acquisition, onboarding, learning and development, performance management, and retention and engagement. And although this is typically considered the role of HR to manage this function or these functions, this is the essence or the heart of any organization where managers have touch points with employees across each of these different parts of the employee lifecycle. And so again, it's no understatement to say that we are currently living through a revolution in terms of how data and AI are impacting each of these elements. And so in the time I have, I wanted to share just a couple examples about what we're seeing, and then give you a couple ideas on big questions that we're trying to address with this initiative. So the first one, we can start from the beginning. Now, anybody's first touch point with an organization is talent acquisition, and we're seeing a tremendous move towards a quantification of the hiring process. So having metrics for hiring isn't anything new, but we see a proliferation of these in HR, everything from time to interview, time to fill, cost per hire, offer acceptance rates, the quality of the actual hires that are being brought in. These are now being quantified and to a large extent automated by virtue of technologies that are facilitated via AI. And I'll share with you a couple examples of organizations that are working on this. First is a company called Mockmate, and this is actually a company that was started by an IESE alumnus, Wayna Landoro, who really fundamentally started this company to help job candidates. So his idea was, I'm an MBA student, I want to do better in interviews. How can I do better? Well, I can apply AI and natural language processing to create essentially a chatbot, which allows me to train interviews. And so what he's done is created a product in his startup where candidates can go and get immediate feedback on their interview performance, complete with advice on how to improve. Now this startup has also pivoted to reach out to recruiters. And now Mockmate, for instance, can essentially run the recruitment process in terms of the initial interviews and provide an objective basis to HR recruiters on the skills and a fit with a company's needs. And so provides a proprietary algorithm that can analyze the answers that candidates give. They recently ran a pilot with this, and they found that there was perfect correspondence between the algorithm's outputs and the HR recruiters' rankings of the candidates that they had interviewed. So this is a promising technology. They're starting funding soon, so if you're interested, you reach out to Mockmate. I'm sure Wino will be very happy with that. There are lots of players in this space. The other big one that I think has received, let's say, more press and is a bit more mature than Mockmate is HireVue. HireVue is now being used by about a third of the Fortune 100 companies. So we're talking about big business here. HireVue essentially does automated evaluation of candidates through video interviews that basically analyze speech patterns and nonverbal behaviors, again, through the video that is done asynchronously. And they claim that they have AI-based algorithms that can turn a 15-minute video of an interviewee into a set of 20,000 different characteristics based on nonverbal behaviors, essentially. And so, for instance, HireVue claims that they can predict things such as the competence or honesty of the candidate that's being assessed for a job. This, I think, we're sort of at early stages with this, despite huge levels of adoption. I think, Samsa said that this changes won't happen overnight. I think in this space, we're seeing some very, very quick changes. If you talk to the data scientists who are familiar with AI, they're a bit skeptical about some of these large claims, but nevertheless, we're seeing huge adoption rates of technologies like HireVue, and they're certainly not alone in this space. So I could go on. I mean, there are many, many different examples, but this is essentially what's happening. We've quantified the hiring process. We're using loads of data and using algorithms to try to predict who will be the best fitting candidate and how we can reduce the costs and time to actually acquire those candidates. And again, this is probably the area in HR whereby we're seeing the shortest and quickest adoption of all the different areas that we might see today. So another area that's getting a lot of attention, if we just, I could speak for hours about each of these, but if we skip ahead to engagement and retention, again, we're using data to quantify how engaged and how much and how long employees stay in organizations. So organizations are utilizing data to provide predictive metrics about who's engaged and who is likely to leave an organization. Retention is a big deal in organizations. It's costly. And so we're trying to reduce turnover by virtue of trying to understand what it is that makes someone leave an organization. And so there's a whole subfield in HR examining burnout rates, trying to identify who flight risks are in organizations. And so you see a whole uptake in software and data tracking of employees' computer activity, for instance. So we have half a dozen startups today looking at what are individuals and organizations doing with respect to their emails, their keystrokes, their internet browsing, and trying to build models using machine learning to estimate the likelihood that that person will either burn out or leave the company based on the company's past patterns. So at a very basic level, for instance, Workday, which is one of the big human capital management suites out there, they can incorporate a tool that alerts managers when their employees have recently become more active on LinkedIn. So we can see this in a number of different ways. Maybe you've changed your internet browsing habits at work after you hear about this. On the one hand, this of course could provide important information for employers to recognize when they need to engage more effectively with the employees. On the other hand, this also provides inputs in terms of who the lazy or disconnected employees are, and the responses could be dramatically different based on the intents of the organization. And this is by far the simplest incorporation of these tools. You have more sophisticated tools trying to provide algorithms that predict things like how quickly you respond to emails or how quickly other people respond to your emails. We have lots and lots of data that are being incorporated to try to predict behaviors. The next level of this, trying to measure engagement, is sentiment analysis. So there's a huge field of sentiment analysis that has been traditionally used in marketing research, and it's found its way into HR and management. Affectiva is one of the many companies involved in this space. This is a company that was spun out of the MIT Media Lab, and they use their technology, for instance, in the automotive space. And I think we're all familiar with this reality. Truck drivers, anyone engaged in public transportation, is videotaped, and there are algorithms measuring fatigue levels, whether eyes are closed. It can alert the drivers to a dangerous situation and also track and give feedback to the drivers in the long term to provide, I think, essential feedback to those drivers. I would say that we're probably in agreement that this is a reasonable technology to use in public transportation. Highway safety is clearly an important element, although perhaps this is short-lived as we see automation happening in the automotive sector. But we also see these technologies being employed in the workplace. So we see now startups and pilots happening whereby white-collar workers in their offices are being tracked. And we've seen a tremendous uptake in this since the COVID-19 crisis has moved a lot of work on the internet and virtual spaces. So we see a lot now of data being collected, trying to measure engagement scores among employees. So again, this technology is not just limited to the automotive space. So lots of different predictive metrics are being used to try to measure engagement and to try to retain employees. And I think there's no question that this is now a big area within HR that's sprouting a lot of startups and a lot of new approaches to trying to facilitate the process of understanding whether people are engaged or not. So again, just going back to the beginning, it's no understatement to say that there is a revolution happening within HR and with the relationship that managers have with their employees by virtue of the data that's being incorporated in this relationship. And I think, the big questions that are being asked today and the two key points for consideration that I think are important for us to resolve as we move forward in the research in this area are twofold. One is, fundamentally and very simply, there's an inevitable drive towards data-driven management. And in many ways, this is fantastic. We want to make decisions based on rational thinking. We want to make decisions that are based on a proper analysis of data. It can help eliminate bias. It can help us move forward without using improperly our intuition. But it does pose an important question with respect to the amount of monitoring and data that we have on employees. So again, we've seen a huge uptake in the amount of tracking and monitoring and availability of data that we can use in order to predict the behavior of employees. And in some respects, this is shifting the power balance between employers and employees. There's always been a bit of an imbalance. Employers have always had a bit more information on employees, but today that imbalance has gone a little bit further out of whack than it has traditionally been. So employees are tracked. Employers have a lot of information on the employees, but we don't see a whole lot in the other way around. And so there's a question simply about how will this impact the relationship between employers and employees and managers and employers. And I think importantly, perhaps more than in other fields of AI, the ethics of AI is of utmost importance when we consider implementing these technologies in the HR or in management. And I think we're at a stage here where we see two potential roads, and it's not entirely clear where we're headed. And we have a choice. We have a choice between using these technologies to augment behavior, to steer people in the right direction, or we have the choice to use this to coerce people and control them. Right? We can use the technologies that predict engagement and retention to punish people and exit them from the company, or we can use it to change our systems in order to engage them. And so we're at this crossroads today. The technology is there, but let's say the underlying, humanistic approach that Franz has talked about, the underlying ethics behind this are still, I think, up for grabs. And I think part of my research on this is to try to help push organizations in the direction of trying to use this primarily for augmentation and steering rather than coercion and control. And I think there are tremendous reputational concerns at stake here. Companies that go in, let's say, the coercion route will, I think, fundamentally face consequences of low employee morale, et cetera. And so we're digging into these issues in terms of how to really understand where companies will be using these technologies, because we're not at a stage yet where we fully grasp that reality. So that's the quick sort of takedown on what's happening in HR. It's certainly a lot more to talk about, but these are the highlights. And I'll now turn it back to my friend and colleague, Samsa.
Thank you. So now we've had a macro picture of what's happening in the economy, and we've had a deep dive into one area of management. So as much as we've talked about the speed of change and revolution that's happening, usually we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run, but underestimate in the long run. Bill Gates, this is called the Amorous law, and Bill Gates has said effectively the same thing in different words. But there's a we can get overexcited about changes, but then miss the underlying cumulative exponential growth that happens underlying. But one of the things that is dramatically affecting these trends now and seen to possibly accelerate many of them, as Sebastian referred to, is COVID-19. And the same data that Mireia referred to earlier on hiring, we can extend that actually. We can keep tracking up to current day. And that's precisely what we've done. So we can keep looking at what is happening in hiring right now during this Corona crisis. And what we find is really striking. First, a lot of people are talking that companies are going heavy digital, digitalization through the roof, levels we've never seen before. We don't see this in the hiring. In fact, if you look at sort of the red line, we know that all occupations are basically, because of the economic crisis, getting hired less, but specialized software skills are dropping much faster than average occupations. Computer skills dropping much faster than average, occupations. And fundamentally, college education is dropping in value. So we don't quite understand yet. This is research, really ongoing research that we're trying to do now, and we're mostly constrained by time and resources. The data is there, the questions are there. But there seems to be currently almost a de-skilling in the economy. We are actually hiring less of highly educated people. However, AI is through the roof. AI hiring had a huge peak at the beginning of the crisis and is still at levels before the crisis, or relative levels comparable to the before crisis. So companies are investing in AI, relative to other ways that they could do things. So AI hiring actually is up as a share of total hiring. So this is telling us that something really fundamental is, being transformed now in the economy because of the corona crisis, potentially speeding changes. So what this means is that you could think about it effectively as a race between the technology and the human ability to learn the skills that are valuable in the economy. On one hand, the technology is developing and the skills required from managers and employees of all kinds are changing, and our ability to learn those skills and learn to develop the competencies that are needed is really being challenged. So we can we can look at sort of prior, there's a real worry that the train is leaving and, wondering whether we're on it. So this is a real concern. And we can look at sort of prior changes. We can look at an earlier technological transformation and sort of try to understand, the key lessons from here. So we can look at going from subtractive manufacturing to additive manufacturing. And what the difference is in subtractive manufacturing, you start with a block of metal, you remove, part of the material, and you end up with a part. Additive manufacturing, you start from nothing and you add material to end up with the part. And what this means is that you can create parts that were physically impossible before, and that then implies that you can make products that were physically impossible before. And we've discussed this with the senior HR people at a large multinational that was deeply impacted by this. And the HR was trying to help the engineers through this transformation, and they were tracking those engineers and trying to, help them develop the skills and learn and transfer to the new way of working. Because it fundamentally changed how you design things, because the parts, even the software had to be rewritten. So the striking thing that they found was that the people who had a hard time were those who relied on years of practical experience, years of tips and tricks that now didn't apply anymore in the new technology. And engineers who transferred better were the ones who had a deep understanding of not just of the tips and tricks, but of the physics of engines, the cooling systems, deep understanding of how things work, of the principles, and that allowed them to apply the same principles with this new technology. So in the same way, we think it's essential for managers to develop a deep understanding of their business, of what exactly is the value proposition, who exactly are the customers they're serving, and then have effectively what's called an abstraction layer, an understanding of the key principles of the technology, not necessarily the nuts and bolts. There are plenty of engineers who can do that, but the managers need to understand the key principles of how the technology works to be able to link it then to their business, to be able to see how this business value proposition, this organizational process, the structure could be redesigned. And so what that means is that we need managers who can coordinate between the AI, the operations, and the business, the people who can really sort of thrive in this new world. So what do these managers have to know? And if we simply divide it into sort of three layers, technology, organization, and business, and sort of, quickly look at sort of key things to really understand from working from the bottom, one of the striking things is this human-machine collaboration. Is this, as I'll explain again in a moment, but the machines, that GPT-3 can tirelessly do those, art writing. On the other hand, from lots of studies of professional writers, we know that a professional writer can write, sustainably 4 hours a day max. And so the amount of concentration, we can only match GPT-3 if we put full mental effort. And we can only do that for short periods of time. And so the value of concentration, the value of mental focus is going to be, going up. And as Sebastian mentioned, the balance of power between employer and employee is potentially changing if our knowledge, the expertise is now, instead of our heads, is in the machine, and we're more generalist maybe, then that's going to significantly affect our bargaining power, about our wages and so on. We also need to be able to reimagine the processes, the organizational structures, and how we do things. And fundamentally rethink the kind of, what kind of skills and people we need. All of this is going to be ethically enormously challenging, because it's going to mean that we're going to have to retrain people. We're going to possibly have to hire people. We might have to lay off people. And it's going to be dramatically challenging for a lot of people, both among employees and managers, to navigate this. So how do companies develop these AI capabilities? On one hand, you can build by hiring and training. You can buy. Acquisitions of AI startups are growing exponentially. There's lots of companies that allow you to rent the capabilities. You can hire consultants. You can hire cloud computing capability and so on. What about then the business? On one hand, the basic finding that we have, both from the research that Mireia referred to and elsewhere, is that this is going to push the efficiency frontier further. You're going to have to do AI just to stay competitive. There's ways in which you can use AI potentially to increase differentiation, to make better products, personalized, and so on. But at fundamental level, this will be required just to stay competitive. We also see significant economies of scale and scope. GPT-3 was trained once. The training itself cost, in just pure electricity consumption, in the millions of dollars. And so just the amount of electricity burned in doing the computations to train that algorithm was in the millions of dollars. So not everybody can go out and train GPT-3s on their own desktop computers or even in their clouds, hiring capacity, whatever. So, you can think about this as same thing, for instance, in medicine. If you train an algorithm once to do diagnostics, and then, every diagnostic happens super fast and cheaply. And then on the other hand, every human doctor needs training, needs time, needs focused effort, and so on. So the scale and scope effects are going to be significant. And basically, it will require fundamental redesigns of many processes in companies. We also see potential for cumulative advantage. If your algorithms are learning fast, you can build feedback loops. That means that there's significant premium for starting early, starting fast, and getting moving. We see significant potential for changes in value capture. Stitch Fix is a personalized fashion service, basically sends you a package of clothing that they predict you like, and effectively could replace brands, at least at the middle tier, not necessarily at the top end. Probably will never replace Chanel, but might easily replace Banana Republic and others. On the other hand, we see the car industry having a huge question as to whether it will go the same way as the computer industry, meaning that the companies that make the software, the operating system, capture the value, and whether the car companies end up being becoming commodity producers of car frames. All these questions still remain unanswered, but are very, very important. Okay, so what are we doing in this initiative then? What is this initiative really about, and what are we doing to help managers cope with these challenges? And fundamentally, I want to summarize it as research-driven insights widely shared. That's it. We want to do research to derive insights and then share them widely across our classes, across our programs, across everywhere else. That's it. So right now, for instance, as examples of our research projects, We're studying how AI is affecting organizations. We have data on organizations. We have AI, we have data on hiring, and we have studies of companies, how they do HR practices and so on. And as Mireia mentioned, we're studying company performance. We're studying occupations. We're engaged in a serious research effort in terms of understanding the performance effects, the drivers of company performance. We're doing a more qualitative study of specifically about the pharma industry, what kind of challenges they're facing, what kind of applications they're finding, and there's some strikingly interesting findings there. We're also, as shown earlier, studying how Corona is impacting all of this. We're fundamentally constrained by time and resources, but there's so many exciting things to do, and so many lessons to really draw from this. And those lessons will then go straight into the classroom. We're building content, we're writing cases, we're writing frameworks, we're writing technical notes, we're teaching materials from our core MBA classes, our core competitive strategy features, AI cases and business models, to our EMBA programs. And we are now in the process of developing a joint program in AI with the Fraunhofer Gesellschaft in Germany to really try to help, combine our efforts, our strengths in the understanding the managerial side with Fraunhofer's expertise on the technical side in AI to help small and medium-sized industrial companies employ and deploy AI. We're further writing materials for broader dissemination, for managerial press articles in IESE Inside and elsewhere. We're writing content for broad, general public audience in newspapers and elsewhere. We're organizing conferences and meetings to help disseminate these ideas and insights and knowledge and share experiences across the program participants and the conference attendees. So fundamentally, the objective of this initiative is to try to help managers get a handle on this, to really try to thrive in this new environment with all of the challenges and ethical considerations and other things that they're going to face. So again, I want to emphasize this. This is about research-driven insight shared widely. We are doing the research to try to sort of develop insights and then communicate and share that with everyone. And so that sort of summarizes what this initiative is about. That summarizes what we're doing, what we already started working on, the results we already have, and where we're going to go from here. And now we can open it up for questions, I believe. And let me see those questions then. So first question is, how can we protect team privacy by analyzing their browsers? How can we protect privacy? Do you want to take this, Sebastian?
I guess the point is maybe you need to redefine what you mean by privacy. So if you're browsing the internet at work, do you have the right to privacy? I mean, that's a question I think that now is being posed, and many are saying no. If you're on your work's computer, your work servers, your work's internet connection, do you have the right to privacy? I think a lot of people suggesting no. Where we're getting now into an interesting gray zone is, well, what happens if you're at work or at home, right? So we're now working virtually. To what extent does your employer have the right to track your behavior when you're working from home? This is something that needs to be resolved because we are pushing the boundaries of what privacy really means. So, there's no direct answer to the question of how we protect it, but I think the one clear, suggestion that we're understanding is the importance of transparency, of organizations being clear about what it is that they're doing with respect to the data that employees are providing them, whether they know it or not. So I think the point is to simply recognize that spying on employees without their knowledge is probably not the best way to get reliable data to make decisions that machine learning or AI can help with respect to making predictions about your future behavior. So again, this goes back to this issue of coercion probably not being the best approach, but informing employees about exactly what it is that you're doing in order to anticipate a little bit the reaction that people might have. But I think it's one of the critical questions that we're trying to resolve now is, where is that line with privacy and how do we protect people's data?
So next question, how does AI-powered employee behavior analysis match an ethically correct company policy?
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're sort of back to the same theme. I think I've scared people into thinking that companies are using your data for malicious reasons. Again, I think it comes back to this issue of transparency. And so we're at a stage today, I think, where companies are not being particularly transparent with respect to what they're doing with data, right? So there are lots of companies doing analyses on how long it takes for you to respond to an email and using that in a larger algorithm to predict your future behavior. There are probably legal ramifications in different jurisdictions, probably more open to this type of thing in the US than we are in Europe. GDPR presumably would limit some of this. I've talked to a few lawyers about this. GDPR, in fact, explicitly outlaws the usage of data without consent and explicitly outlaws the usage of algorithms for personnel decisions if those algorithms cannot be made public and can be understood, which contravenes a lot of what we know about machine learning, which is that the algorithms really aren't very well understood. And so, again, we haven't really reached the point in which there have been, let's say, lawsuits or precedents set about where the limits are with respect to the usage of data, but we're starting to get there. We're starting to have a clear picture of where these boundaries are.
So that leads to the next question. Do current privacy laws capture the ethic that utilization of AI requires? And so you Sebastian, referred to that already, but I want to point out another side of this, which is that the economic studies now of the effect of GDPR are coming in, that on one hand, it is very nice that the protection of privacy, but it comes at a cost. Satisfying the constraints of GDPR is effectively a fixed cost, and which means that it's harder for smaller companies, and it's significantly affecting smaller companies in particular. And so it turns out that the biggest winner in Europe, at least, of GDPR is Google. And so Google's market share is actually increased predictably after the adoption of GDPR. So the regulation comes also at a cost in that sense.
Yeah, so I would just add to that, which is I think we have this ethical dilemma today, which is, again, that there's no question that having lots of data on employees will make predictions better and can therefore make employees more productive. There's no debate about that. The debate is simply about how far you want to take this and what happens if you don't start doing it, and what happens if you cannot compete with organizations that are doing it, right? So, in jurisdictions where there's less regulations, where there isn't GDPR, you can imagine the US or maybe even China, they're collecting much more data than we are in Europe. And there is, I think, a question about the sort of competitive nature of how this will unfold over time if some companies do and others don't collect this type of data to build models around predicting behavior. So it's an important, I think, ethical dilemma that we're facing.
So we have more questions along these similar lines. What is the risk? AI is globally seen more as a new tool for Big Brother purposes rather than a good tool to help people and society. We've always faced this dilemma with every new technology. There's always wrong uses, right? Beneficial uses, challenging, negative ways to use the technology. Now, given everything we've discussed here, it's pretty obvious that AI has significant, challenges. That the only comparable thing is like nuclear technology that I can think about, in terms of the ethical challenges it poses for society. Obviously, it's a big risk that it becomes simply a tool for surveillance and not for productivity. But that's why we are working hard here in order to try to help managers make the right, good decisions about this. For Mireia, regarding that study, could we substitute AI by digital in that study and get the same or similar results?
Okay, so you would like to know if digital skills are different from AI skills. And I wish I could show you the list of skills, and then you could decide by yourself if they are more digital or they are more AI related. So they are pretty focused. So for example, machine learning and decision trees, keras, these type of skills are directly linked to AI. However, it is true that there are complementarities, right? So there are complementarities. The more data-oriented and digital-oriented is your corporation, the easier it is for this corporation to implement AI applications, AI technologies. And therefore, we're going to see these complementarities that will allow those corporations to leap forward. I would say that our effort here was to really fine-tune AI and differentiate it from other digital skills as well as from other software skills. And that's why I showed you at the beginning of the presentation the difference between a spike in AI hiring versus a plateau hiring for specialized software skills.
So let's continue. There's an interesting question here, because you pointed out the similarity in the adoption in manufacturing and agriculture.
Yeah.
And we have a question like, why is that happening? Do we have any hypotheses, any insight as to why they're roughly similar?
So this is, those patterns, that's a very interesting question. So the pattern is similar in terms of the progression and in terms of the percentage of jobs relative to the entire level of postings, right? So it's as a percentage. So what we observe is that they are adopting at similar rate, at similar speed, and at similar rate. Now, why is this the case? Well, we could say that potentially that agriculture has really transformed itself into a manufacturing process. So it's those two types of corporations might not differ that much. And I could go back to our data and then show you, well, let's see how all these job characteristics are different. So I think this is a very good question.
So next question, we have two related questions here. We have here, when to use internally developed AI capabilities and when to partner or buy from startups with AI services. And second is, what is the best approach to acquire AI skills for employees and for companies? So the extremely good questions, and it's very hard to answer in a short period of time. However, one thing I do want to point out is that it's probably not the best idea to go immediately hiring data scientists. I've been talking with a large European multinational that helps companies adopt AI skills, and what the finding, at least from their internal data, is the companies that adopted packaged tools first and found business use cases and then progressed into the technology did better, progressed faster. So the key was finding the business use cases, training the managers to use them and learn and take advantage of them, and then getting deeper into the technology and seeing where and how does it make sense to either hire or train people or acquire startups. So in our studies, what we have found also is naturally sort of areas where the AI capability becomes core to the competitive advantage, or where the market is unable to provide it. So for instance, anything that's very specific to your company, if you're working on a narrow area, it's going to be hard to acquire or rent those capabilities. Now the questions come faster than we can answer. So, my sincere apologies to anybody whose question we're gonna miss. Okay, how, this is a big one. How do we make AI a response how do we adopt AI in a responsible way to not make it a social inequality driver? A big one.
There are two levels, right? I would say that there are two levels, and probably Sebastian, you can speak more about, I would say that level one is how corporations manage the data and the adoption of AI algorithms. And then the next level is how governments or policymakers manage the result of this adoption, right? Because from what we observe from our research is that those corporations that adopt AI faster and better are going to grow much faster, are going to have are going to invest more in R&D, and potentially are going to be more productive and more innovative. So AI is going to lead to wider gaps. And we are currently at a situation where we are very well aware about the differences between the haves and the have-nots, the corporations that have a lot of market power and those that are struggling to survive. So AI is going to expand those differences. And we will need policymakers to manage that, most likely.
So there's a big role for policy here that goes beyond what the managers can or are able to do. We are working now on a large-scale study to look at the regional effects of adoption of automation technologies compared to, for instance, trade. So what is the economic shocks? We compare trade with automation and look at what the effects are. And we're finding so far, at least in our preliminary analysis, a striking difference in terms of, the general well-being of the society, the level of social capital, and so on, that automation seems to have bigger negative impact than for instance, trade shock. So, which means that it goes beyond the companies and requires a wider policy response, a societal level response that it's simply impossible by the managers per se to handle that. So part of this initiative also is while we're as a business school are focused on helping managers, we also draw a lot of implications and insights for policymakers. And we are in communication with policymakers and sharing these ideas widely among the policymakers as well. So now we have one set of questions here. We have two questions roughly dealing with mid-cap companies that are versus larger companies that are doing AI adoption. What advantages do mid-cap companies potentially have over large companies, and what are the key lessons there?
Mid-cap companies.
Sort of mid.
Yeah. So mid-cap versus large.
Yes.
Which advantages? I think that the large have a lot of advantages. So maybe you can try to come up with some of the advantage for the mid-cap.
So I do think that there are advantages. So as mentioned earlier, the technologies, we've known this since 1980s, the digital and computer technologies have significant economies of scale. So this, AI is showing that and taking it further into different parts of the economy. Now, in terms of the mid-cap companies, sort of, mid-sized companies, they do have advantages in terms of much faster reaction times, much faster operations. And we're trying to study this as well. I am personally writing a case on a company, a relatively mid-sized Spanish company, in a very commodity business, adopting AI and how they're fundamentally transforming the value proposition, the business model, but also the inside of the operations. Now, given there are some ways that companies can try to deal with the scale issues that are inherent in terms of, AI technologies, there's possibilities of federated learning where if you cannot access data directly, you can share data and sort of without violating the privacy. There's synthetic data, there's other technological solutions, and this is an intense area of study in our initiative and elsewhere in terms of trying to really help those companies as well. I think we're let's see what here. What is the biggest impact of AI on e-commerce? We see customer chatbots, brand name generators, web development tools. What has AI changed in e-commerce the most, and what will change in the future?
I'm not an e-commerce expert, so I would be sort of guessing wildly, but I would guess it's predictive models of behavior, as you know, as we've seen it. I mean, Amazon's capable of knowing what you want before you even know it consciously, and it's capable of making recommendations for products that you probably never thought you wanted or needed, and it's boosting their sales. That would be my sort of naive perspective.
So I'm gonna I think Stitch Fix is a super interesting, and we see lots of examples similar to Stitch Fix elsewhere. If one of the sort of earlier on, if you were wealthy and you did shopping for style, for clothing, for fashion, you would go and get personalized service. Now, obviously that was only available for the wealthy. Stitch Fix is scaling that. They have and Stitch Fix is not unique by any means in this area, but it's probably the biggest. They have an algorithm that predicts the kinds of clothing that you like, and they ship you a package of clothing once a month. You get 5 pieces and you keep what you like and you return the rest. So they're basically scaling the personalization into an entirely new level. Now there's similar companies, Pros and others, that do it with beauty, hair care, and other products. So you can get a fully customized shampoo for your hair, and the algorithm learns over time to make it better. So if first month it's kind of okay, but in 6 months it's potentially very good. So the scaling of personalization into fundamentally personalized products is a thing that would be effectively impossible without AI.
And has allowed, I would add then, has allowed for some industries that had very retail in them to become more retail. So for example, banking sort of, and expanding the retail side of banking, or expanding, all these retail side of different businesses that before did not have an interaction with the client. Now there are all these capabilities, and that last mile is extremely useful and necessary. So everyone is trying to become a retail of sorts.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have one fundamental, what seems like a fundamentally definitional question. How do we differentiate AI from well-known established technologies, automation, scripting, data analysis? How do we differentiate AI from established technologies? We talked about digital earlier,
Yes.
But there's automation, scripting, data analysis.
There is a lot of overlap. Indeed, there is a lot of overlap, but we can differentiate at the same time. And that's what we tried with our skills. Now the discussion would be, okay, is machine learning only about AI, or could we say that it's about purely data analysis? Well, it's the next level. So, here we could have some discussion, but at the end of the day, if we try to narrow it down to the skills that are more specific to AI, we still find our results in terms of diffusion across industries, across occupations, and most importantly, the value across occupations. So that's why we engaged on analyzing potential wage premiums across occupations, to understand that even if right now managers with AI skills, it's an extremely scarce type of occupation, those are the ones that, according to the market, are generating a higher impact in terms of productivity within firms.
Excellent. So we have one very interesting question here. What scares you about AI most? What are you most scared about AI?
Mm-hmm.
I think we can all offer our, do you want to start?
Well, for me, it would be what's already been discussed, which is this issue of inequality and where we're headed in what I think is a very much winner-take-all kind of scenario. I mean, I think it's already come up that we think that larger firms can bear the biggest advantages of these technologies. What does that mean for smaller firms? What does that mean for family companies? What does that mean for people like employees who now have a sort of disadvantage with respect to the data that we spoke about earlier? So I think, for me, the biggest concern would be, this growing inequality that can come from this, and whether or not we truly trust or have faith in our politicians to make effective decisions with respect to the inevitable policy decisions that will need to come from this. And that's where I'm skeptical, but optimistic.
Can
What do
I
you
finish
think?
with an optimist view? You
Go
with
ahead,
that.
go ahead.
Okay, because I agree completely with what Sebastian is telling us. Yes, it's the fear of inequality, of discrimination, and of scale, those three things. If I have to think about the positives, then the positives is about us being as human as possible and as creative as possible. Because what we observe in the data is precisely these complementarities, the complementarities of the AI with the creative and the communication skills. And we haven't talked about that, but this is as well coming out in our research. So it gives us with a lot of hope that we actually observe these complementarities of what's really defining us as humans, as being capable of creating new ideas and of communicating, and AI enhancing and making those skills even more potent. So that's going to be what we have to try to do, become more as creative as possible, and rather than repetitive and going on the linear way.
So I want to.
Do you not have an opinion about it, Samsa? Or
You know me, I have an opinion on everything.
Okay.
But fundamentally, what scares me, related to the points that you guys made, what scares me most, and the fundamental reason why I'm really working hard on this, I'm worried that the managers at those middle-sized companies, small companies, and everybody else except Amazon and Google will just give up. And there are technologies from synthetic data to federated learning to partnerships to coalitions to alliances to various other forms. And the reason we really want to push this is to try to get these executives at all other companies to take this seriously and start pushing on it, so that we, because I believe that the wider we get this into different companies, different sizes of companies, different types of companies, the less the inequality will be a problem. If all of this gets dominated by Amazon and Google and Facebook, we're going to have a huge problem. We're going to have not just an economic problem, but a political problem. And so my worry is really that we wait too long to get the regulation right, or the laws, or to have the right answer, or we worry that this isn't for us, it's only for them. We really need to get executives at all kinds of companies to thinking about this, to moving, to understanding what it means for them and how they can really compete with this. And I fully agree, there are fundamental structural things that make it not obvious at all. But that, what's the option? What's the next best? Just give up and go home? No, we can't do that. We have to get in. We have to get into the ring. Okay, last question, and my apologies, we're running out of time. So I think there were a couple of questions that I missed. So my sincere apology to the people whose questions were not answered. But the last question, what about biases in AI algorithms? Are we going to exclude certain groups of people by deploying and using automated processes? This, I have a comment. If you want to, since HR is strongly related to this, are you?
Sure. So I think it's certainly been an issue that initially wasn't addressed very much, and today now is getting much more attention. How do we eliminate bias from these algorithms? If the data are going into these algorithms are biased, how do you get it out? Well, it's quite difficult. And so I think, again, there are lots of solutions to this. Can you solve it purely through improving the algorithms? Probably not. You need human intervention, and you need, again, policy getting involved with making sure that proprietary algorithms can't hide beneath the science or the data to not produce or not, let's say, expose the reality that there is inherent bias. So I think one of our big problems is companies don't want to know. So one of the big considerations today is there's a whole movement towards auditing algorithms. So can we develop an algorithm, for instance, for hiring? Can we go in and have auditors come in and say, is this biased or not? Well, the problem with that is if you bring in auditors or you do this internally, you learn from the data that it is in fact biased, and then you have legal problems to deal with, because you've demonstrated clearly that there is a bias either in the prior data or in the hiring practices that you've now implemented given the new algorithm. And so a lot of companies don't want to know, and they're avoiding auditing their algorithms. And so again, this is where policy and I think politicians come into the picture, which is mandating certain requirements about transparency and the usages of this technology to try to deal with some of the biases. But we're far from being able to fully eliminate it. But I guess the bigger question is simply, what's better, the human bias or the algorithmic bias, right? Do we trust managers left to their own intuitions and feelings to make good decisions about people? Well, we know from hundreds of years of history that that's simply not working. So again, let's take a bit more of an optimistic perspective. No, we can improve. We can do better than what we're currently doing.
And there are some AI models that can try to be more explainable, in the sense that, yes, so when you use, and let's imagine, for example, in finance, right, you use a credit model to give credit or not to give credit to an individual. If your model is based on machine learning, then that's kind of like a black box, identifies a pattern. But of course, you want to know what's behind, what are the factors that drive whether you give or you reject credit to a specific person. And therefore now we see new AI models that will give you as well what sort of explainability, what are the factors that are behind that. So I think that there's as well a lot of innovation precisely because of, we need to try to, as much as we can, to open this black box of the algorithm.
So I want to take a slightly different view on this, because I'm not so worried about algorithmic bias, precisely because we know it. We know it's there. There are even statistical methods to introduce random noise, so allow the algorithm to learn about its own biases and sort of develop. What worries me, and this connects me with my previous answer to the sort of bigger worry about AI, is that the bias is not just in the algorithms themselves, but the kinds of algorithms we have. I'm working on a large-scale research project and looking at male and female inventors, and it turns out, in general, not just in AI, people tend to innovate for people like themselves. If AI is entirely developed by Google and Amazon, it's only going to solve problems of those companies. This is one of the fundamental reasons why I believe we have to get all kinds of people, all ethnicities, gender, education levels, people, large companies, small companies. We have to get people involved in this so that we can develop AI to solve problems, not just of the Google executives or the Amazon executives, but of all kinds of people. And because people solve their own problems, people innovate for people like themselves. And so that's fundamentally why you cannot necessarily buy tools for your small company from a large company, because they don't think about those problems necessarily, and so on. So this is why I think it's fundamentally important to get this diffused in companies of all sizes, across people of all backgrounds, and so on. So there, I think I'm going to finish off with this comment. I have a message coming. Can I announce tomorrow's session? Can you tell me what is tomorrow's session? And I'll announce. But sort of summarize. Okay. The Building Forward series continues tomorrow with a very special panel session on the future of pension plans. It will be in Spanish at 7 p.m. here in Spain. Prof. Javier Diaz Jimenez will be joined by Oscar Arce, General Director of Economy and Statistics at Banco de España, and José Antonio Erce, President of Foro Expertos Instituto BBVA de Pensiones, in a dialogue moderated by Salvador Arincibia, my apologies, from Expansión. Remember that today's session will be available for your viewing on demand on our LinkedIn page and YouTube channel for our alumni and the greater IESE community to watch at any time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.